All right, we are back live with Monday's edition of the Osceola Seminole Sidelines podcast / videocast / live YouTube show. So many things that we do with the Seminole Sidelines. But I am joined, as always, most of the time I'm hosting the show, by Osceola recruiting analyst Charles Fishbein. And Fish, first of all, did you have a good Father's Day weekend?
Yeah, I got to relax. So.
What did your family do for you yesterday?
Leave me alone.
Well, did you get any nice presents? Did you get any socks?
Yeah, I got socks and undersized shirts that they call it. These coaches can make fun of me, like Coach Atkins and stuff. So when
your mediums?
Yeah.
All right. Well, nothing wrong with that. All right. So, Fish. Well, first of all, I do want to get into the official visit weekend that Florida State just had, particularly. A couple of guys we want to talk about, including Charles Lester. But there was some breaking news this morning per Rivals. The number one wide receiver in the country, Jeremiah Smith from Chaminade, Madonna, is supposed to be on campus at Florida State for a visit, whether it's official or unofficial. I'm not sure. I would assume, since it's been advertised by Rivals as a one-day visit, it is a unofficial visit more than likely. But he's been committed to Ohio State. Everybody in the country would like to have Jeremiah Smith at their program next fall. What do you make of him being at Florida State this weekend?
It can't hurt. I mean, anytime you got the top receiver in the country on campus, it's always a good thing. Florida State showed a lot more in the passing game last year with guys that basically they landed from other schools, whether it's Johnny Wilson or these other guys. So they showed they could take guys and plug them into their system and be very productive. So they can sell that, hey, listen, if you come here, look what we did with these guys. They came from other programs and we made them a lot better. Just think what we could do with someone like you that we have for 3 years before you head off to the NFL.
Yeah, and listen, he's, there's been some back and forth about whether he's going to be committed to Ohio State, and he is committed to Ohio State, but how strong that commitment is. Do you think Florida State or another in-state program has the ability to flip him from Ohio State? He's been committed to Ohio State for a while.
Yeah, I mean, he's got ties. Their wide receiver coaches considered one of the best coaches in the country. I mean, it helps when you got the players he has, but the stats don't lie. He's done a very good job of all these guys doing well in Ohio State system and then going on and having productive pro careers. So that's what Jeremiah Smith likes. There's ties there. He is part of a 7-on-7 team that most of the top kids that are from that 7-on team do go to Ohio State. So it's going to be tough to beat them, but anything's possible. You're talking about a kid that has to go out of state. Things can change rapidly in recruiting. He may end up wanting to eventually stay closer to home. You just never know with these situations. They're very fluid, especially when you're talking about a kid going out of state and being thousands, miles away from family and friends. So.
Yeah, and like we always say, if you get them on campus, you got a chance, right? And the more you get them on campus, the more chance, the greater that chance is. All right, Fish. So probably. Kind of good segue into this past weekend where Florida State had 6 prospects on official visits. And obviously the headliner in that group was Charles Lester. Seemed to have a very good visit. I don't know if you got a chance to watch any of the video post visit or read the article that Kurt or Bob wrote. But, listen, a couple of things stood out to me. I know that obviously coming in this weekend, you felt like Florida State was in a good spot with him. They certainly seem to be only strengthening their position with Charles Lester, who does have one official visit left. But a couple of things that he said that strike me. He says he feels like Florida State is he's most comfortable at Florida State where he's been here multiple times. But of all the places that he has visited, which is Colorado, Alabama, and Florida State right now, at least officially, he feels most comfortable there. He is going to Georgia this weekend for his last unofficial visit in June. And said yesterday that he's going to probably go home. He was driving home yesterday. He's probably going to come up with some kind of timeline for a decision. But the comment he made to me that really sticks out, and you can go, if you're a listener or listening to us right now, you can go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com and see his whole interview. But the quote that stood out to me, out of all the head coaches I've been to, the guy that makes me feel like the highest – that guy, talking about Mike Norvell, makes me feel like the highest priority in the world. And he's saying that when he's meeting with a head coach like Nick Saban, Kirby Smart this next weekend, and obviously with Deion Sanders out in Colorado, three of the most high-profile coaches in college football, and two, obviously, of the best programs in college football, recent college football history. What does that say about the job Florida State's doing with Charles Lester? And what does it say about Florida, Mike Norvell's ability to be able to recruit against guys like Nick Saban and Kirby Smart?
Well, Lester's been a lean towards Florida State for pretty much over a year now. I just think that if he's going to leave, it's more of Florida State trying to give him a reason not to come than anything else. It's very hard to lose these type of prospects that, one, are from Florida. They grew up a fan of the team, and his recruitment reminds me a lot of LaMarcus Joyner. Joyner was a big-time Florida State fan. He took the visits to Ohio State and Georgia. And at the end of the day, he really didn't want to hear anything else other than something that was regarding Florida State. I think Lester is a kid that they've had a great shot at all along, and now it's just their job not to mess it up.
Yeah, listen, and he certainly indicated that he was very high on Florida State and, insinuated that they were the leader in his recruitment right now. And, of course, he did say that he has another visit to Georgia this weekend, but certainly Florida State has done a good job with Lester, and he certainly feels very comfortable. Kid's got first time I'd ever met him. Kid's got a very good personality. He's fun to be around. He is a guy that really seems to embrace the recruiting process and really making the most of these trips and enjoying getting to meet some of these people that obviously being a good football player has afforded him. But certainly sounds like he's a big fan of Florida State. From the first time I stepped on this place, I felt the love and open arms that they have for me. Just being able to come over here 10 times, that builds the bond stronger and ensure the love and security that they have for me. So he is a guy that's all in on Florida State, it seems like right now. And I agree with you. Certainly if there was any room to waver, he certainly seems like he's stronger now with Florida State than he was before he came, and he was obviously very strong before he got here on his official visit. Now, listen, how much does a guy like Charles Lester saying things like that about Mike Norvell impact a guy like Jeremiah Smith? Those guys are from the same area. They've probably played against each other, know each other. As you said, these 7-on-7 teams. Does it have any bearing on maybe?
I don't think it's going to have much of an impact on Jeremiah, just because they're not the same kids. I don't know if they even do play. They don't even play on the same team. They're just from different areas of the state. Now, can they talk and try to recruit each other? Yeah, but at the end of the day, I think their commitments or their recruitments are exclusively separate. They're going to do what they're going to do separately. It could only help to have better players getting, Florida State landing those guys. I mean, Lester is considered a 5-star player, so he may want to play with better players. But at the end of the day, Ohio State's recruiting those same elite kids, so yep. I really don't think it's going to have much of an impact.
All right. Obviously, B.J. Gibson was committed to Florida State in April. No surprise here. He, basically said that, he's basically locked in. I have never doubted my decision since I committed on April 15th was one of his quotes. And, of course, he's been back several times, this spring. The one thing that he did talk about was that he spent a considerable amount of time with Charles Lester on his visit, and basically just telling him the same things that we hear echoed from a lot of kids, that this FSU staff and Mike Norvell is going to be real about what is expected once these kids get here. There's no sugarcoating. How with he was the only committed prospect on campus with this weekend. Does that have any impact on, was it good to have a kid that's already committed to this class on campus with 5 other players that weren't?
No, I definitely think that helps because they already know what they want at Florida State, and they can relay that positive message. And those guys are the ones that help actually the staff recruit, are guys that are either on the team or guys that are committed. I'm a big fan of this kid. Just seems like a great kid. I think he's a very good football player, very underrated. He could only help Florida State's recruiting of guys like Lester and some of the other uncommitted players.
Yeah, of course. And then, of course, Kevin Levy, he's been on campus. I believe this is at least his 3rd time. We saw him in back-to-back weekends in April. He's being recruited, based on what he said, to play any one of 3 positions, corner, nickel, or safety. I kind of like him better as a corner than a safety. Obviously he's still got time to grow, but he is. He's about 178 pounds, and he seems his body type right now seems to be more suited for corner than it does safety. But just your thoughts on him. Listen, I believe he's related to Ricky Knight. We talked to him a little bit about that after his visit. Would it be cool to play with Ricky in college? But I know he said on Sunday that FSU is a priority for him. Where do you think Kevin Levy sits in the pecking order for Florida State? They're recruiting a tremendous amount of DBs. We just saw Kai Bates and Jameer Grimsley in here this past weekend. That obviously you had 4 DBs in here this weekend, not counting BJ, who could play either side of the ball. But where do you think Florida State is with Kevin Levy right now?
I think he's in that second group of prospects. I don't think he's in the first group. He's a good player. He's got some upside, but he's more of a project than some of the other guys above him. I think, Ricky Knight, these guys like that, Lester, Kai Bates, these are the guys that really are targeting. And you always have to have a backup plan just in case those guys do decide to go elsewhere. I mean, they have a lot of suitors. So you can't expect to go 3 for 3, and he's not a bad 3rd or 4th option on the back end of their class.
Yeah, all right, and it looks like his other 4 schools outside of Florida State are Louisville, Kentucky, Rutgers, and Illinois. So we will certainly keep an eye on Kevin Levy. And then Ricky Knight, he said he definitely had fun. He loved hanging out with the players. He said Florida State staff and players are always welcoming. I love it. He still said that Florida State being the first school to offer him still resonates with him and still has made an impression on him. He's going to visit Miami this weekend. He says he feels like he's a priority at Florida State and a school he has loved since the recruiting process began. Now, he did not list a group of favorite teams. He didn't no pecking order really, other than he feels like Florida State is made him feel like he's a priority for them. What are your thoughts on Ricky Knight? And obviously, I think we both agree that Lester's probably the number 1 corner on the board. How do you feel where Ricky Knight fits in there with Kai Bates, Jamar Grimsley, Kevin Levy? I mean, these guys are really competing against each other for a spot.
Yeah, I like Rick.
Fish. All right, so we have lost Fish. But anyway, obviously Ricky Knight was on campus, and we'll get Fish's thoughts if he's able to jump back on with us here on Seminole Sidelines. The one defensive tackle that was in town was Alex January. Hey, we got Fish back. All right, so Fish, let's just circle back, let you finish about Ricky Knight. Obviously, we're talking about the fact that there's been a number of cornerback prospects here on official visits. Just where do you think he stacks up with the Lester, Levy, Grimsley, Bates discussion? And those aren't the only ones.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Ricky Knight. I like him a lot. I think he's a prospect that Florida State got on early. He kind of blew up this spring. I think he's a player that a lot of other schools want as well. So I think he is in that first group. I think he's someone that Florida State would like to get. He's a lot more versatile than some of the other defensive backs. He can play corner. He could move into the slot. He could play some safety even. He'll come up and hit you. He's got great technique. I think Ricky Knight is a kid that if he gets it right, he could play on Sundays.
All right. Well, we did not get a chance to talk to one of the visitors, but we did get a chance to talk to Alex January, the defensive tackle. He said that the connection with Odell Haggins and Adam Fuller is Odell Haggins, and Adam Fuller is paramount to his recruitment by Florida State. He's been to Texas. He's been to Texas Tech. He's LSU. He's got some impressive offers. It was really kind of hard to get a feeling for his physical build on Friday when he arrived. He was dressed in some loose sweat clothes, but we saw him yesterday, and he's a big, thick kid, looks really good, really muscular, over 300 pounds from Duncanville, Texas. Obviously, he spent some time with Jalen Early and Jarrell Powers, who are both from Texas. They repeated everything we hear. They told him it's hard work here. They go and hold you accountable, all those kind of things. Now, he does have an official visit to Texas left. What do you think the chances – where do you think he is on their defensive tackle board, and what do you think the chances they have of pulling him out of the state of Texas if he's a priority?
Yeah, I think if they're bringing him on a visit, he is a priority. They have very few names on the defensive tackle board. It's not a great year in the state of Florida, and I discussed it on the message boards that, a lot of times it's just the year that you're recruiting, guys' location, where they're located at. They're having to go outside their comfort zone to pull in a defensive tackle this year. They have a lot of depth, some young guys that still haven't produced, but it's not a super major option for them to land a bunch of D tackles this year, but you'd always like to keep that cupboard full. I like this kid. I'm not in love with him. I think he's close to maxed out. It happens with a lot of these Texas kids. They get such good coaching and weight training that a lot of times they're basically what you see on film is what you're going to get. He'll help from a depth standpoint. I think he's a very good run stuffer. I don't know how much he gives you as a pass rusher from the interior. He's a big guy, not super explosive off the ball, but he can command some double teams and allow your linebackers to come in and clean up a little bit. I think anytime you could get defensive lineman or offensive lineman, I take as many as want to come, because a lot of times it's a numbers game, Pat. You know that. A lot of these guys, hey, you recruit 4 and hopefully 2 end up starters and being very good. There's very few elite guys. Fans get all caught up in this. Those elite guys everybody in the country wants because they're basically unicorns. There's not many of them, and they're very difficult to recruit.
Yeah, listen, unfortunately, we did not get a chance to talk to Xavier Mincy before he left town yesterday. We're going to try to catch up with him. Fish had him leaning to Florida coming into the weekend. We're going to do our best to try to catch up with Xavier and get an update on how that official visit went. Fish, I got a couple of guys I want to talk to you about, and then we're going to let you go. Obviously, a big official visit weekend for Florida State this upcoming weekend. Upwards of 20 guys coming on official visits, the biggest weekend in June. You and I will talk a little bit about that later, but I got a guy I want you to check out. There was a guy at the individual camp yesterday named Jamuri McClure from Goshen, Alabama. I do know they ran a 4.4 at camp. It was very obvious. I don't know that the kid has many offers whatsoever, but I'm going to tell you what, I'm just going to call my buddies and let them know about him because he can run now. He stood out at that camp, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But, hey, Fish, appreciate you joining us. We'll have Fish back on either Wednesday or Friday as we preview the official visit weekend upcoming. But we're going to bring on now a rival Southeast regional recruiting analyst, a guy I've known for a while, John Garcia, to talk a little bit about Luke Kromenhoek and Elite 11. John, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, good to be on with you, Pat. Good to see your face, even virtually.
Yeah, man. It's been a while. John and I spent some time together working at Fox Sports and Scout.com back in the early 2010s. I guess that's how you say it, John. I don't know how to say that. But, of course, John has just come back to Rivals or joined Rivals about a month ago. And so, John, welcome back to Rivals, and good to see you again, man.
Yeah, good to be here, Pat. And we try to hit the ground running. We've already hit the road about 5 times in the last month, and naturally we got out to the West Coast to check out the Elite 11 and OT7, which of course had many Florida State commitments and even more targets in action. So yeah, most of them look pretty good. So excited to talk about it.
Yeah, well, listen, we do want to talk. We want to get your thoughts on number one, Elite 11. I kind of want you to explain to our listeners, viewers, what the purpose of it, what the format of it is, what the Elite 11 quarterback rankings mean. Also want to get your thoughts on Florida State's 2024 class. But just to obviously, Luke went out there, finished in the Elite 11 out of the 20 quarterbacks were there. Just explain to us a little bit about what the Elite 11 was created for people that don't know, and kind of what the format of the weekend is.
Yeah, the Elite 11 has become, I think, the at least most famous or prestigious quarterback camp that there is out there. They do a circuit throughout the spring, and they select 20 finalists to go out to LA and rip it for 3 days against one another. And the staff has a ton of history, a lot of NFL and collegiate experience on that coaching staff. Trent Dilfer used to run it. Now he's, of course, at UAB, so the rest of his staff is still there. And there's a lot of recognizable folks when you roll up to Elite 11, whether it's Brian Stumpf, Quincy Avery, Matt Leinart was out there. The college counselors were out there. So this was a pretty star-studded event. So naturally, those 20 guys, they get put through the gauntlet. The first day is sort of a mirror of the regional camps, basically station work. You're working on different footwork fundamentals and mechanical fundamentals the first day. And then you cap it off with a fun rail shot competition that really gets everybody going. Caleb Williams was out there spinning it, and all the kids were oohing and ahhing, and then they got to go compete against him. So that was fun. And then day 2 is really my most, anticipated day. It's the pro day. So there's a 20-throw pro day script, NFL style, that these kids go through. Same 20 throws, one by one. So naturally, everybody has sort of their own way to score and or chart that system. And we did so here at Rivals as well. So we've got all 20 throws that Luke participated in. And then on the third day, it's a bit of a mix and match. There's a 7-on-7, there's 1-on-1s, and there's an accuracy gauntlet. So it's kind of emptying the tank day at the Elite 11, and Luke had a really strong day 3 out there at that event as well. He really came out of the gates hot day 1, had a bit of a setback during the pro day. Some of the deep throws got away from him, but he rebounded in a strong way that final day. I know we'll get into that more, but that's basically the format. And they name a winner, and a lot of those previous winners are pretty well-known commodities, right? Whether you go to Justin Fields, Tua Tagovailoa, I think C.J. Stroud won it his year. I mean, it's pretty notable with some of the high-end guys who have won it over the last several seasons, of course.
Yeah, and obviously, a lot of people want to know what does the Elite 11 rankings mean. Obviously, Luke was. I think they pick a winner. I believe it was the sailing kid from that's committed to Alabama. I don't think there's a actual number ranking past 1. But what do the ranking? He's in the top 11. I know they posted the results in alphabetical order. But what does that Elite 11 ranking mean in the recruiting circles? How does that impact rankings, ratings, all those things that people ask you guys about?
Well, look, this is really the only time, Pat, that we get these guys 1-to-1, right? I mean, there's not many times we're going to see a Dylan Raiola versus a Julian Sayin versus a CJ Carr versus a Luke, right? So we got that up to 20 quarterbacks over the last week or so in Los Angeles. So I think it gives you maybe the best baseline for what these guys can do. Look, nothing substitutes Friday night tape. Nothing substitutes what the sport is supposed to be. So any offseason event is always going to come with a grain of salt. But I will say within the myriad of offseason events, the Elite 11 has become, again, one-stop shopping for the entire industry, because we get that one-to-one look at these guys. And really, all 3 days are designed to make these prospects uncomfortable, whether it's hot yoga, cold tub workouts, and then throwing accuracy gauntlets. all the pressure, being timed in certain drills, being measured with your spin rate and these new analytics. This is all designed to make these kids look uncomfortable. So when you see a quarterback excelling at different points, not only is it impressive in and of itself, but over the grand scheme of things, the more you can pile that up, it's almost like the more stock you can put into a prospect, especially if he just looks right. And I think that is really what we can gather. Some prospects, Jaden Davis, DJ Lagway, you got to see a little bit unorthodox throwing motions from them, as to where Luke is right there 3/4 and able to put a lot of velocity behind it. So we get to see the throwing motions, the footwork, everything one-to-one, even the competitive spirit with some of these guys. And I think that can push or pull relative to a final ranking as we look forward to getting through the bulk of the 2024 cycle. You get to see the competitiveness. You get to see the body language. How much when a ball gets away from you, how much does that wear on you as a quarterback, right? We need to forget that as soon as possible. So there are just different data points to gather from this event. For us, we do put a good amount of stock in it because in terms of the offseason, it's more important than 7-on-7. It's more important than even some of these other camps and combines that go down. So for us, it's a must-see every year, a must-video, a must-photograph, and a must-attend event. And we usually get some pretty telling results coming out of it.
All right. Well, obviously, what Florida State fans are going to want to know, what did you see in Luke Kromenhoek that you really stood out to you as a positive? And then, obviously, as a recruiting analyst and a guy that's seen a lot of football, played football, what do you think you saw that maybe he needs to continue to work on as he goes through his senior year and goes through quarterback training this summer with Denny Thompson over in Jacksonville?
Yeah, look, Luke, I thought had an amazing day one. He really put himself in the mix. I think probably a unanimous top 5 day. I hadn't looked at every network's rankings, but I couldn't imagine his day one was not a top 5 day across the board. Certainly was for us here at Rivals. Myself and director Adam Gorney were out there, making these marks, and Luke's arm talent just really jumps out at you. He absolutely has a classic 3/4 delivery, as we mentioned, and on a 6'3", 190-pound frame, it just sort of looks right. And unfortunately, that's part of the game, right? How long is the motion? Can you condense it? Can you get it out quickly? Luke checks those boxes, and the ball jumps thereafter. I think you could probably rank his arm strength among the 2 or 3 best in the entire class, and that has been reflective of what we saw at the Elite 11. I think Raiola and Lagway are probably the strongest arms, but Luke was right there behind them. And I think that's really where you should get excited as a Florida State fan, because the mechanics and the velocity really pop out at you. So when you zoom out and realize he's only been the starter for 1 year, he was playing wide receiver a couple years ago, you start to look at the multi-sport background and you really start to like the upside. You like where his development can go, because in a short amount of time, he's really turned the corner as again, a forever Elite 11 finalist. That is set in stone. So that first day, he really put everyone on notice. He has the look, the arm talent, and the mechanics that we look for. And he's very athletic, as your audience knows, Pat. He's incredibly athletic. He hit 20 miles an hour as a junior there in Savannah. So he's checking that important and necessary mobility box in this day and age as well. So then we get to the pro day, and we get a little bit more up and down, so we see him come out of the gates incredibly hot with the short to intermediate stuff. He's on time, he's on target. And then, you get to that 5th throw, and it's basically an RPO action, reverse out corner to the backside. So for those of you who aren't football lifers, it's a big ask. It's a big ask for these guys to get to that point. It's about a 40-yard throw down the field to your weak side. And that's where we started to see a little bit of inconsistency from Luke. Again, the timing was there. The arm strength was there, but it got away from him just a little bit. And I do think it threw him off his game just for a couple of throws. And there were a couple other deep shots in that small stretch in the middle of the pro day. But I thought he recentered. About 2 or 3 throws later, he recentered and got back on track. He hit the deep dig route, and he finished with a perfect throw on maybe the hardest throw of the 20-throw script, which is a bang 8 in the back pylon of the end zone over two padded defenders. So basically, you're trying to fit the ball up and over and drop it in the bucket with some touch at the back of the end zone, and he finished with a perfect throw. Only 6 or 7 of the quarterbacks finished with that high mark on the final throw. So even in a day that wasn't his best between the three, we saw some resiliency and the ability to recenter from Luke, which I thought was important in the mental part of this evaluation. And then he came out on day 3 kind of pissed off, chip on his shoulder. He knew he didn't have his best day on day 2. He told us, he admitted it to the reporters on hand, and he kind of said, watch me bounce back. And that's exactly what he did. Looked great in the 7-on-7 portion and looked even better in the accuracy gauntlet, which was really a combination of stationary targets and pressure, because you're timed at every single stop and you get some freedom to take some chances to push the ball down the field. And I think we like that Luke was willing to take those chances down the field instead of pivoting conservatively when maybe he didn't have the best day going into that final workout. So I like the confidence. I like the floor. I like the mechanics and physicality we get from Luke. But in between the ears, I think the competitiveness really stood out from him over these 3 days. And I think more than any position we evaluate, Pat, we want to see that ability to bounce back at quarterback the most. I think corner is a close second. Left tackle is in there as well. But we want to see you fail and then figure it out after that point. And the Elite 11 is one of the few scenarios where we get sort of that full spectrum, because we're watching you spin it, 250 times over 3 days. So I do think that that's a big plus in the present and certainly the future when we're talking about the future Seminole quarterback.
Yeah, listen, and I'm glad to hear you say that, because one of the things I took away from the state championship game this last year that they played in was first half. I mean, he did not have any protection. I mean, he was getting beat up, battered. Really was not a great day for their offense, at least in that first half anyway. And then he came back. You saw the athleticism, started running the ball, made some big runs. He took some hits and got up and kept on going. So, I was glad to hear you talk about the competitive spirit, and he does seem like a kid that fights back from resiliency, and a guy that's only going to get better as he continues to grow into his body and gets bigger and stronger. As we all know, as you said, he's just a junior. He's only started, or he's a rising senior now, but only started 1 year of football there in Savannah. Where do you see? I mean, and it's probably unfair to ask this question, and maybe unfair to Luke, maybe unfair to you. But what do you see his ceiling in college as far as, you got Jordan Travis, who's going to graduate. I'm assuming that Luke's going to come in and enroll early, I would imagine. Then you've got A.J. Duffy, Tate Rodemaker, and Brock Glenn, who was extremely impressive in spring drills at Florida State, another kid that enrolled early. Where do you see him? How long do you think it'll take him before he's willing to compete for a starting position at Florida State?
Well, look, I think Luke's got 2 prerequisites that are really mandatory to compete early on as a big-time future blue chip. Yes, he's going to get a bump. Quarterback. And he's got the physical tools and the arm talent. I think those are the 2 things. That frame is going to be expanded upon positively, and he'll step in day 1, assuming Travis, like you said, is gone. He will step in and potentially be the most physically gifted of the quarterbacks. When it comes to pushing the ball down the field, consistent velocity and athleticism, I think he is right up there with any of those names that you rolled out. I think Glenn is more seasoned, more mature, a guy who in an offense that is going to be methodical will work you down the field and minimize the mistakes. I think if it's about the ceiling, though, and if it's about pushing the ball down the field like we saw Florida State do so well in 2022, I think a quarterback like Luke fits that just a tick more than we saw out of Brock Glenn, who was an Elite 11 guy last year. Another guy we've got intimate knowledge in scouting over the last couple of years coming out of Tennessee. So I think he's got a fair shot. Obviously, from an experience standpoint, he'll be a 2-year starter at a private school. So I do think that will create a learning curve relative to absorbing a playbook and obviously implementing an offense beyond the normal transition you need to go through as a high schooler up to college ball. But from a pure physicality and talent standpoint, Luke will be at the ready relative to the rest of that quarterback room once he gets there. So as you know, Pat, after that, it's really on him. So I think not having an entrenched starter coming back with his competitiveness that we talked about, he's not going there to redshirt on purpose. It might be the result anyway, but I know that's not the goal coming out. And that's what you want from the future face of your program. And after seeing him for 3 days, I do have more belief that Luke will be the future face of Florida State football.
Well, listen, we got a whole 2023 season to get through, and should be an exciting one in Tallahassee. But certainly, what awaits the quarterback battle that awaits this team next spring is going to be fascinating to watch. And of course, again, assuming that Luke's enrolling early, I would be surprised if he does not. Well, John, thank you for telling us about Elite 11. Now, I kind of want to segue into your thoughts on Florida State's recruiting under Mike Norvell, the 2024 class, and even beyond, if you want to get into it. But you did break the news today that the country's number one wide receiver for 2024, Jeremiah Smith for Chaminade Madonna High School in South Florida, was going to be on Florida State's campus for either an official or unofficial visit. It sounds like it's a one-day deal, so I probably think it's unofficial. He has been committed to Ohio State for some time. Yeah. I know a couple of weeks ago you felt like he was really a lock for Ohio State, but as you well know, and as I've talked about, Fish and I talk about again and again, if you can get a kid on campus, you got a chance. Now they probably would need to get him on campus more than once, and probably for an extended period. But where do you think Jeremiah is? Why do you think this visit is taking place? I know you're a little bit closer to that situation than I am.
Yeah, look, talking to Jeremiah this weekend, he was out there working out at both the Elite 11 and OT7. So you talk about a workhorse. This guy was doing double workouts out there. He said that people don't realize he's been to Florida State as much as he's been to Miami. So read into that as much as you'd like. But, I do think there is some credence to think Florida State is maybe better positioned for him than many realize. Because really, there hasn't been a lot of FSU talk with Jeremiah Smith. But you talk to him and you get to know him a little bit. And he's watching what's happening on Saturdays. He's watching what these offenses look like on Saturdays. And there's a reason why, some of these programs that are, blue bloods and winning at the highest level are fading in his recruitment. The Georgias, the Alabamas of the world aren't quite up there relative to some other schools that are willing to spin it, a little bit more modernly. And then that's where Florida State, I think, has his attention. We all know Ron Dugans does a great job recruiting the position in general, and he does a great job recruiting in South Florida in particular. So that relationship is something that is there. And Jeremiah said, look, Mike Norvell has personally been recruiting me since I was in 9th grade, so he's got a more familiarized relationship with this Florida State coaching staff than that of the Florida Gators, than that of the Miami Hurricanes relative to the tenure of those current coaching staff. So I do think there's legitimate interest here. He's been honest about doing his due diligence, right? Committed to Ohio State, receiver history, Brian Hartline. We all see why and understand why, but he's a realist. He's a South Floridian, right? He's seen his teammates in the portal, his former teammates in the portal. He's seen his former teammates commit and decommit. So he's wanting to create some contingency plans just in case something changes, whether it's his perspective on Ohio State or something at Ohio State itself between now and January when he would theoretically enroll. So Florida State is going to be in this group with Florida, with Miami. Penn State's going to be getting a trip later this week as well. So there's sort of a group forming. Georgia, USC has been in there previously. There's a group forming behind Ohio State. So right now, if you're Florida State or any of these other schools, your job is to try to get to number 2. That's the position you need to try to get to right now, because everything he is saying about Ohio State screams solidity and screams due diligence relative to these other visits. But we've seen this happen before, right? The coaching carousel gets crazy. Yep. There's an entire season ahead, not only with on-field college results, but visits that are going to happen during the season. He's only taken a few official visits to this point. And as you know, starting next month, that thing is wide open. And who's going to say no to a Jeremiah Smith official visit? Not many coaching staffs in the country. So Florida State is kind of a sneaky player in this race. This, I think, will be his 6th visit to Tallahassee, assuming he does make it up there travel-wise. So you don't go to a school that many times to grab a T-shirt, right? There's a little bit more to that. And I think the staff continuity, the in-state perception on the field, and he admitted this, hey, that matters. That matters. Yep. He's watching Miami this year. He's watching Florida and needs them to bounce back to sort of continue that consideration. He knows where Florida State is at, so that's a big step ahead for FSU in the in-state race for Jeremiah Smith, which is just as back and forth as the out-of-state race. So there's some things in FSU's corner going into this visit, and theoretically an official visit before all is said and done, that could make FSU sneaky in this race the longer it truly drags out. And when you're the number one receiver in the country, it's going to drag out until signing day almost no matter what.
Yeah, when you can understand why he's taking a look at Florida State based on Mike's history as an offensive play caller, whether he's been a head coach or offensive coordinator. He's produced some of the top offenses in the nation the last 7 or 8 years. He's been a head coach. Obviously, he had tremendous success throwing the ball and running the ball at Memphis. And, of course, he's a guy that likes to push the ball down the field even when they're running the ball very well, which obviously helps the downfield passing game. All right, so I want to transition to this past weekend, and then we can get in more general subject areas. But, Charles Lester was here. Obviously, a lot of people feel like he is a heavy, heavy lean to Florida State. When he was here in April, we asked him, I think it was either April or January. He's been on campus multiple times. But he had said at that point, in my heart, I am committed to Florida State. He has not come out and said that verbatim yet. But he's got to go to Georgia this weekend. But he said something yesterday, John, that kind of struck me, and I want to kind of put it. I want you to help put it in context. They asked him about Mike Norvell, and he said, out of all the head coaches I've been to, that guy makes me feel like the highest priority in the world. The coaches he was talking about are Nick Saban, Deion Sanders, and Kirby Smart, who he will see Kirby again this weekend on his official visit. What does that say about where Florida State has come in the last 3 years? What does it say about Mike Norvell that he is able to go up head-to-head against Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and Coach Sanders at Colorado to a lesser extent, because Deion's had no success in a major college football as of yet. But when he starts talking about that way about Mike Norvell against the best programs in the nation, Georgia and Alabama, without a doubt, the two best college football programs in America right now, what does that say about Florida State and Mike Norvell?
Oh, it says a ton. Those two schools you mentioned, especially on defense and especially in the secondary, they kind of go grab whoever they want, right? I mean, Alabama goes into Atlanta to get the number one safety in America last year in Caleb Downs, ridiculous amount of first-round draft picks. And Georgia the same. They'll go out west for Akili Ringo. They'll go to the Northeast for an Ellis Robinson and go battle anybody for the best. And by really, any measure, Charles Lester is one or two in that race in this class. So to get that type of praise for your head coach and his specific recruiting without maybe the resume defensively, especially of a Saban or a Smart, tells you two things. One, Florida State's arrow it continues to point way up on the trend meter for not only Lester, but for elite prospects, regardless of position. And then two, look, Charles is valuing his specific recruitment. This isn't a brand deal. This isn't a logo kind of war where, hey, I'm just going to go to the biggest logo and that's it. I mean, this is really about his personalized experience. And you see players get away from that a lot during the recruiting process. And you could understand them, right? Imagine being 17 years old and you're talking to Norvell and Smart and Saban. I mean, that would be overwhelming, and you probably could get pushed into an early decision. Well, Charles hasn't. He's been steadfast, yet his love and that desire for Florida State has really never left him in particular. I do hear conversationally that there's other folks around him, whether it's coaches, trainers, mentors, family, etc., that are starting to pull in different directions. And that always can get tricky in any recruitment, especially in this day and age of NIL. I mean, he just moved and transferred high schools. I mean, there's a lot going on in his recruitment and in his life. So you wonder how that could potentially extend the process, theoretically giving other programs time to make up some ground. But there's no doubt that Charles Lester III himself envisions himself at Florida State. Moving up his official visit, I thought was really telling, because initially this was, hey, I'm playing the long game. I'll visit FSU in December, give them one final shot, and I'll make a decision. You felt good about FSU at that point, but now he's talking about shortening things. He moves up that official visit to the month of June, right in the thick of it, with all these other trips, all these campuses he's less familiar with relative to the one in Tallahassee. And you got to feel really good about Florida State's chances as long as he is the decider in the recruitment. And that's why I've got a future cast in for the Seminoles for Charles Lester, keeping him home. I think he's a fit there, not only athletically, my goodness, everybody would take him athletically, but I think culturally, it's kind of far enough away from that Venice area, but not too far to where you've got to hop on a plane every time. And he's a family-oriented guy, very close to his aunt. We see her every time we're out watching and evaluating Charles. So I do think that's going to play importantly in this recruitment when all is said and done. So you got to really love Florida State's chances right now, even with that Georgia trip ahead.
All right. Outside of Charles, obviously, how do you feel about the class they have committed right now? Who stands out to you in that class, and what do you like about what they're doing?
Well, look, the trend meter on Luke himself is trending way up, and when your quarterback is turning more heads as the cycle progressive, that looks really great. And that evaluation, taking him before he became this established Elite 11 quarterback, I think is another nod to Mike Norvell and that offensive staff. So that looks really solid. Obviously, you got to go to Landon Thomas. I mean, he's elite, one of the top tight ends in the country. Flipping him from Georgia, again, just a banner, plant the flag moment for Florida State, especially with him being a Georgia native. That is a state that has to be a stronghold for FSU if it is going to make another jump and contend for college football playoff participation. Of course, on Rivals, we love a bunch of other of these commitments. LaWayne McCoy got one of the biggest bumps in the country over this last rankings update. Just a lean, explosive two-way guy out of Miami Central, which has always been good to Florida State. Whether you like him at receiver or corner, he's elite. I think he's got a real chance to finish as a top 100 guy. Jaden Parrish moved up for us, just a striker, a guy who just doesn't get seen as much as others. So maybe it's taken some time for us to come around on him, and we will continue to do so. And then you've also got the guys who have been there forever. I mean, Cam Davis is as rock solid as it gets. Reminds me of Cam Akers a little bit, out-of-state guy, big, physically well-built, plays quarterback at the high school level. But when we see the running back stuff, it's as good as it gets. Low center of gravity, very comfortable moving laterally, powerful, explosive, and more comfortable than people realize in the passing game. This is a guy I've seen split out as a slot at camps and route up Power 5 defensive back commitments. So this is a true complete and physical back in Cam Davis, who's been obviously an ambassador for seemingly forever. He's been committed to FSU for like 3 years already. Yeah. So I think you've got a little bit of everything in this class and a chance to really build it out more going forward. If you're competing for Lester, you're a sneaky good contender for JoJo Trader. Jason Zandamela, the number 2 center in the country, is considered an FSU lean by some. So this class is strong at 11 commitments.
This weekend, I think it's been growing.
Yeah.
Listen, it's going to be a huge visit for them. And of course, now you mentioned McCoy. Now he is committed to Florida State, but he made a kind of, and maybe it's gamesmanship on his part, he made a comment the other day that his recruitment is wide open still. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, is that just a kid having fun on Twitter? Or do you believe that to be the case?
Look, I think McCoy's recruitment has changed since he committed. You could argue, just like with Luke, the commitment put a lot of programs on notice to who LaWayne McCoy was as a recruit. And then now, as they have kept closer tabs, just like we have, we're saying, hey, this kid's way better than we thought. Every time we see him, we like him a little bit more. So if we see that, imagine with what these coaching staffs with 50 recruiting staffers can go out and learn of these elite recruits. So naturally, you do put some worry into that from the Florida State perspective. He is a Miami kid who's considering Miami, so that is always something that is going to pop up. I do think that coaching staff, just like Billy Napier in Gainesville, is just better than the last one when it comes to recruiting. So it's harder to go down to Miami and win at Miami Central. It's harder to go down and win at Miami Columbus and some of these other schools that are consistently producing elite talent. So the commitment was great. It might have put others onto LaWayne McCoy, but now you've got to hold on. I think that's, again, we talked about flipping recruits from Georgia or holding off Georgia and Alabama, maybe for a Charles Lester. The other phase is scoring a great evaluation and holding on to recruit for several months. And that's what it would have to be for FSU to hold on to LaWayne McCoy. I don't know if it's wide open, but Miami in particular is absolutely in this ball game. So that one's going to be a tight race all the way through, in my opinion.
Well, listen, it's the old saying goes, it's never over until they sign the dotted line, and it's probably never more so been the case in college football recruiting. Now you got the NIL involved. But all right, so and I'm going to ask you about one other thing. One of the kids specifically, I think it caught everybody a little bit off guard. Dylan Stevenson, the defensive end from Christopher Columbus, was going to started his official visits with Stanford and committed to Stanford. A lot of people thought he was a heavy lean to Florida State. Now, initially, he was supposed to be here this upcoming weekend. I'm not sure whether he's coming or is he canceled that. If he's canceled that visit, we're going to work to find that out. But certainly, were you surprised by that he chose to bypass all the schools, Miami, Florida State, among others, that were right a lot closer to home?
Yeah. Auburn, Louisville. Yeah, he had a stacked list of programs, but like you said, he took the visit out there and he said it just kind of hit him. He's having dinner and meals with professors and the academic staff at Stanford as much as he's going to parties and hanging out like he does at some other visits, and I think for him, that's something that really put into the perspective of, hey, not only can I go play Power 5 ball and explore the country, but I can obviously get a degree that you kind of just understand is different than a lot of schools that were after him. So I do think that was part of it. And yeah, I was surprised. Look, Dylan admitted this was Florida State's race to lose from about January to 2 weeks ago. So I do think there was some credence to that. FSU was the only school he had visited multiple times with family on their accord without an official visit. So there were a lot of tea leaves reading towards Florida State, especially relative to schools closer to home. But, that Stanford trip was a second trip out to Palo Alto. And again, that official visit created just more opportunity to dig into what life at Stanford would be. And he fell in love with it. And he decided he was done with the process at that time. And look, he's not the only one. Stanford's probably the hottest team in college football right now. They've added about 15 commitments since that first official visit weekend in the month of June, the one Stevenson was on. So something's in the water up there, and kids are buying into Troy Taylor's program. So you just got to sort of take your L's and move forward if you're Florida State, although that's a great prospect, rivals 100 hybrid edge guy.
Yeah, I think it caught a lot of people off guard. And like you said, he seems locked in right there for right now. Things change. As you said, on-field performance will, for these guys that have not signed yet, and they can't sign until December at the earliest, on-field performance will matter as these guys continue to firm up these commitments. I did want to ask you about a little bit about the recruiting calendar changed so much since I have been in it, directly when I was at USF in South Carolina. We now have unlimited official visits. What are you on board with that? You think that's the right thing to do? Listen, these coaches don't have any time off anymore besides maybe the dead period in July. I mean, that's about it. And obviously, you can't go out in August either. But kids can come on your campus in August. But what do you think about the unlimited official visits?
It's just another tool for fluidity. I think kids will take more visits. I know kids will take more visits, which is going to mean more early commitments and eventual decommitments. It just is what it is. Kids are going to experience more atmospheres than they ever have. And I think it's another double-edged sword in recruiting, just like NIL, just like the early signing period. On the plus side, it's going to give opportunity for less fortunate kids and their families to go see more schools, right? If you're a kid in Houston without great means, you might not be able to get out of the state outside of maybe LSU. Now you can go to Ohio State. You can go to USC. You can go to Miami. You can go to Florida State. You can go to schools outside of your footprint without sacrificing one of the final five officials if the school deems you worthy of an official visit. And naturally, that's going to create more early commitments and more decommitments, which is the other side of this thing, because those who maybe weren't considering schools will say, hey, well, I've got unlimited visits. Let me go take one or two extra, do some Jeremiah Smith type due diligence just to make sure. And as we saw with Dylan Stevenson, you can go to a school and really fall in love with the presentation. And with it being official visits, it won't just be about those game day weekends. It's going to be about dinner with the coaches and time with the personnel and the team, maybe going out after a victory. I mean, it's going to be a more expansive experience for a lot of these recruits at the senior level. So naturally, it's going to be a little bit more hectic for us to keep track of it all. And it probably means more movement for these recruits, which has really become the norm, right? Yep. Nobody's surprised when a prospect decommits, even when everything looks great for the player and the school. I mean, look at the number one quarterback. Raiola decommits from Ohio State when, I mean, they're spinning it as well as anybody at that position to go to Georgia, right? So, I mean, there's so much of that going on in the sport that a little bit of an increase probably won't move the needle. But I think on the positive side, you do get more opportunity for those kids who don't normally have that option. And I think that's great for that minority of the audience.
All right. Well, like we said, the recruiting calendar's never been busier. There's coaches spending more and more time. I don't think it's going to go any way but continue to move that way. You now have the first window for the portal come open in December. You also have early National Signing Day. There's a ton of stuff going on in December. Are you in favor of either eliminating early signing date altogether or moving it up into you've already got kids taking official visits in June. Why not have that early signing date at the end of July as opposed to the middle of December, particularly now that you have the portal, or you think it's just going to continue to be business as it's going to continue to be done as it has?
I think there has to be change, right? These rules were put in place without the portal, without unlimited official visits, just factors that change your entire objective as a coaching staff. I mean, some schools are going 50-50 between the portal and high school recruiting, and that's becoming less and less rare in this day and age. So something like that is going to limit your numbers. So if you're a school looking to take 15 recruits and you got 15 commits in July, you would love, from the school's perspective, to lock those kids in. And on the flip side, if you're a prospect that maybe isn't a Jeremiah Smith or isn't a LaWayne McCoy that's going to have all these options, hey, let me lock in my spot at a school before it hits the fan or before the portal window opens back up. You know, I do think creating an earlier period that limits the number, maybe 10, maybe 15 is that number. And you say, hey, the first come spots are this amount. Let's lock those in from both perspectives. I do think both sides would agree to that type of situation. But again, with the NCAA these days, you know, who knows how long some of these changes are going to take to get implemented and how that will impact things. But I would say that fluidity, that commit, decommit mentality, flipping the portal, those things aren't going to change no matter what you do with the date. You can lock in a commitment or a signature to a particular school. You're still going to have kids leaving before that first spring and or that first fall camp the following year. So I don't think it changes the fluidity, but it probably allows some size of relief in the sport, which really don't exist right now, whether you're the recruit or the recruiter.
Yeah. Well, I have a ton of more questions I can ask you about the portal and how it's going to affect high school offensive line and defensive line recruiting. We'll get into that another time. I do have just one more question. This was more for fun than it is anything else, because I'm truly convinced that anyone that is not sitting in an athletic director's office or president's office has no idea. I think it's a bunch of spitballing. But conference expansion is always something new comes out every week. 2 weeks ago, there was something about now you don't have to be an AAU school to get in the Big Ten, which has never been a rule, but it's a preference. And that made Florida State a legit I think Florida State is close to being AAU if it's not. But anyway, long story short, Florida State's going to go to the Big Ten. Then you read another story that says last week that the SEC is only interested in 2 ACC teams, North Carolina and Virginia, which if you're just thinking of football, it doesn't really make sense, right? But you're talking about television sets and revenue and all those kind of marketing. You have entire states that you eat up. But we're sitting here 4 years from now having this same conversation. What conference is Florida State in?
That's a great question. I want to say it doesn't matter, Pat. You know, I do think Florida State has the brand and history to where it's going to survive regardless. Look, geographically, would the SEC make more sense? Of course. As you see the superpower movement towards the SEC and the Big Ten, you kind of know, hey, we got to jump into one of those boats, right? So I understand that. I wouldn't call it a worry just yet, but that curiosity from the fan base, absolutely. But I think the history, the talent that will always be there, the marketability, and the multi-sport ability of Florida State. Look, great in softball, has had huge runs in basketball, soccer, etc. All of that is going to be advantageous in this period of movement. So it's hard to track it all, as you said, but I would say whether it's the SEC or Big Ten or staying in the ACC as it maybe pivots to 4 super conferences as opposed to 2, whatever it looks like, I do get the sense Florida State's going to be okay because that brand is rock solid. It's not one that's just trendy right now. It's got its history and it's up right now at the same time from a football perspective. So it's in a good position. It just needs some clarity. And I think that's true for a lot of elements of the sport itself.
Yeah, I think all football fans will be happy when we have a little bit more clarity about expansion and where it's going and what conferences will be here. And of course, I was going to ask you about the SEC schedule for 2024. Were you 8 or 9 games? We'll get into that another time because we could talk all day about a lot of different things. But hey, John, first of all, welcome back to Rivals. It's great to see you again. It's been a long time. Of course, you're welcome back here anytime. We will probably ask you to come on this show more than you want to, but you're always welcome if you want to come on here for any part of a segment. Any day we do this Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We're gonna take a little break in July probably, but appreciate your insight, your expertise, and look forward to having you back again on Seminole Sidelines. If you are not an Osceola subscriber, please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com. Check us out. We do have some free recruiting information from this weekend. You can go to the site and check that out. Obviously, we also had a live incoming thread for official visit weekend and outgoing thread, so you have to be a member to get to that. But certainly some videos of the guys leaving as we interview them. If you get a little bit more out of that than you do the written interviews. But again, floridastate.rivals.com or theosceola.com. Again, John Garcia, Rivals Southeast recruiting analyst. Thanks for joining us, and we will be back on Wednesday in some form or fashion, whether it's me, Bob Kurt, or Jerry hosting this thing. We'll be back on Wednesday for another edition of Seminole Sidelines.
Thanks.